Welcome to Website Design, the Complete Guide. This course is going to have everything you need to know in order to make a website from scratch. We're going to be covering the three basic cornerstones of web technology. There's going to be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, if you're familiar or you're not familiar with any of these, we're going to be taking it from scratch. So all the way up from what the base code structure is and how to start creating structure with HTML, how to add in different tags to create elements and build out your website. Then we're going to be showing you how to apply CSS. CSS is the styling layer to your websites, making them unique and giving you the ability to actually customize what they look like. And then we're going to be introducing JavaScript. Now, JavaScript brings your HTML code to the next level, allowing you to create interaction on those elements and allowing you to create dynamic two-way content that you can communicate with your website users and manipulate the HTML, manipulate the CSS, and so on. We've also got some bonus content included. So I'm going to be including some jQuery as well. And jQuery is a JavaScript library that allows you to create code faster. So my name is Lawrence, and I've been a web developer for over 15 years. And I am so excited to be able to give him this opportunity to present HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to you. Working with websites and creating websites has allowed me to have so much amazing experiences within the web, giving me the ability to create websites and just allowing me to have that creative feel and effect with the content that I'm producing. And I wanted to share this experience with you. I've also created this course to be a fast-paced course where we're going to be going through all the fundamentals and core concepts for the three main languages. So we're going to be starting from scratch and working our way up. So when you're ready, let's begin working with HTML. In order to write and render out HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you need an editor in order to create that code and then follow it up by running that brand new file within a browser. And you can run that within any browser. So more than likely, you already have the tools necessary in order to create your first web application right on your computer right now. And if you don't, I'm going to show you the tools that I'm going to be using within this course. So if you want to give these a try, they're going to be Brackets, which is an open source text editor. So you could download it. It's an Adobe product. And this is the one that I'm going to be using through this course. If you already have a favorite editor, then feel free to use that. Or if you don't want to download anything, you could always use any text editor that you have on your system. So if you have Notepad, Text Wrangler, depending on your system, you're going to have some form of writing an HTML file. And all you have to do is create that first file, give an extension of HTML and open it up in your browser, and you're going to see that the browser is capable of rendering out that content. And that essentially means that it knows how to read through that code and display it as intended. Now, if you don't want to do any of that, and if you just want to connect to a website and write some code, there's a really good resource here at CodePen. And as you can see here, I just opened up a version of CodePen here. So we've got one cell here for HTML, one for CSS, and one for JavaScript. And you can also see that as I type code here, it's actually going to display in the bottom view area. And this is a really good resource if you want to practice coding. And you can see that as I put in different syntax, different code here, it's going to render that out. So it just turned it red. I wrote out hello world, and we're going to be covering off all of this code throughout the course. So this is just a demonstration of what we can do here within CodePen. And we can also run out JavaScript if we wanted as well. So you see that now we're going to have that pop-up window show up. So it renders out that code as we type it in. And again, really great resource to practice. Another really great resource for finding out more about code snippets is Stack Overflow. So if you haven't checked out this website, it's definitely worthwhile. Got a lot of amazing information here. Another really good resource is DevDocs.io, and this is an amazing resource because they have literally, you can go here and you can find out any kind of code, type it in and see how it's being used and how you can use it as well within your own code. So sometimes they give you some code snippets, other times they give you what values and what variables to put in. So this is a really amazing resource, and it's got all these great examples here as well. So definitely worth checking out Stack Overflow and DevDocs.io. And as I said, if you are looking for a web editor, if you want to work online, there's CodePen and there's a bunch of other really good resources that you can utilize right on the web in order to practice code. And one of the main things about learning to code is practicing that code. So set up your web editor and let's begin writing some code. This is going to be a quick run through of what we're going to be covering within the HTML section. So first off, we're going to be covering meta tags. We're also going to be looking at comments. Then we're going to be talking about titles and how to set the doc type. Now all three of these, or all of these concepts, are going to relate to how you can build out your own basic HTML template in order to create any website you want with this starting template. So that's the basic bare bones skeleton of an HTML page. Then we're going to look at what tags are, what elements are, self-closing tags, and so on. And we're going to go through in more detail what all of these tags are and how to use them within your code. We're also going to be looking at how to create content with typical elements on your HTML page. So we're going to look at paragraphs, headings, line breaks, and so on. So these are some of the more commonly used ones. I'm also going to be sharing resources that I'm going to be working with, as well as sharing the source code. So as we go through the source code of the course, you could take the source code and practice it, write it out for yourself, and try it out and see what you can make HTML do. There's different ways to organize your HTML content. So once you're building out all of those tags, there's options that you can use. So when you're creating lists, you can do unordered lists, ordered lists. We also have tables, frames. So these are just ways to contain content in different ways. There's also what the basis is of the internet today, and those are hyperlinks. And these give you the ability to click something and move to an entirely different web page. And essentially that's what connects the internet together, is these hyperlinks that give the user the capability of moving from one page to the next. And then of course forms. Now forms in HTML, there's a lot of information with forms. There's a lot of different options with forms. You could also build a very basic form, and of course you can build out forms with more and more options. And we're going to look at attributes and also what's new with HTML5. So with the advent of HTML5, they allowed us to create a whole bunch of different new elements and a whole bunch of really cool functionality. So that all came in with HTML5, and we're going to be covering that within this course as well. Looking at divs and spans, how to utilize them and prepare them for styling your website. Here we've got what's new with content sectioning with HTML5. So there's different ideas about how to structure your content. And of course, we're going to be covering all of this within the course. And then also looking at styling and CSS and how to bring that styling and start bringing styling into your web pages. I'm going to show you how to add CSS, how to add JavaScript, and so on. So the next lesson, I'm going to cover off what we're going to be looking at in CSS, and then we're going to look at what we're going to be covering in JavaScript and jQuery in the upcoming lessons. In the first part of this course, we're going to be looking at what HTML is and how to use it. And we're going to be using HTML and CSS in order to make a website from scratch. You might hear HTML, you might hear HTML5, so you may be wondering what's the difference, HTML5, HTML, and why do people use so many different ways to describe what HTML is, and what exactly is it? HTML5 is the fifth and current version of the HTML standard. And what HTML does is it's markup language used for structuring and presenting content from the World Wide Web through browsers to the viewer, to the users. And for those of you that are interested in finding out more about what HTML is, the history behind HTML, there's really good information here over at wikipedia.org. So I'm providing the link for this if you are interested in reading up more about the history and so on. Currently, we do work with HTML5, although you can use previous versions of HTML as well, and browsers are able to actually render that content out. So we actually do have several different versions of HTML5, but there really hasn't been a lot of changes between 5.0 and 5.2. And with the introduction of HTML5, one of the biggest changes was the way that we handle the tags and our new ability to have more semantic type tags. So that just means that our tags carry more meaning along with them, and we also had the introduction of a whole bunch more additional tags and functionality within just plain HTML. And now combined with CSS, we can build really amazing websites. In order to create a website, you do need to understand HTML and HTML5 as well. So let's get started. Within this lesson, we're going to be looking at what HTML is and how we can actually create HTML code. So there are a few different tools available online. There's a lot of different tools actually available online in order to create HTML. And you probably have something on your computer right now that you can write and start creating some HTML right on your computer. So, and if you don't, there's several different editors that you could download. So for Windows machines, Notepad is popular. For Macs, Text Wrangler is popular, and as well, we've got a listing here of some of the more common web browsers, because it is important to understand that web browsers are the ones that actually handle this front-end code. So that includes everything from HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And the web browser that you're going to be using, it may or may not be able to handle some of the newer functionality of HTML and CSS3. So it is important to notice that a lot of the world is using Google Chrome, and we're going to be using Google Chrome throughout this course as well. So over here, I've just opened up some information on Wikipedia again about browsers, the share of browsers being used according to rank, and there's a bunch more information here about browsers. So browsers, what they do is whenever the user this is the user interface that the user uses in order to access HTML content. And HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is all rendered out through the browser. So you don't actually need to have an internet connection to render out HTML pages. So you could literally create a page on your computer, name it HTML, and have it render out within the browser, and they'll know what to do with it once it comes to the point that they need to render that out. So when it comes to developer tools, so we've got Notepad. So this one is one of the more commonly used ones, and the reason people use it, especially when they're trying to practice HTML, it really does give you the ability. It's a very straightforward and basic editor. So I've got my Notepad open here, so this is what it looks like, and it's just really straightforward, and it gives you the ability to write just straight HTML, CSS, and JavaScript very easily. If you're on a Mac, there's Barebones has Text Wrangler, which is as well a really good editor. And in addition to editors, there's a ton of great developer tools that are available online. So there's things like CSS Validator, Markup Validator, and a whole bunch of other really cool tools. So we're going to be giving you a list of those within this course as well. So you're eager to get started, and in the next lesson, we're going to create our first HTML file, and I'm going to show you how really easy it is to create these HTML files. That's coming up in the next lesson. So in this lesson, we're going to be looking at creating a basic HTML template. And what that includes is creating HTML tags to wrap around a head, to wrap around a body. Head section is used to contain all of the head information. So it's essentially, actually it's not even needed in HTML5, but it's always good to include for formatting consistency. And the body is the second main container area within your HTML5 template, and this is where all of the body information. So this is actually where the contents of this are meant to be consumed by viewers that are coming to the website. So this is where you place all of your visible, user visible content. So let's open up our editor, and I'm just going to open up Notepad. I've created a blank HTML file, so I just created a blank file, named it index.html, and I'm opening up my browser to that same window that we have here. So this actually window is opening up to wherever this file is going, and if we notice, we can start typing in some content in here. So first thing that we want to do is start out with HTML. And HTML is a series of opening and closing tags. And we see that here within the editor. It's got this minus sign, so I can open and close these tags. And then we nest additional tags within those opening and closing tags. And we needed to include a head, and we also needed to include a body. And you're going to see that for the most part, all of this is very standard within any web page. You're going to find that same format. And when I go out to the web page, we don't actually see anything happening. If I go to view the source, we see that we have our source information there, but we don't have anything being output on the page. And that's because we haven't entered anything yet into the content area. So if I was to type something like hello world, go back out and refresh it, now we see that we've actually got some content. So this is what at the basic root is what we do with HTML and how we create these templates. And of course, we do need some additional meta information here in order to make it more compliant and easier for the browser to understand what it is we're rendering out. So we're going to be looking at that in the next lesson. In the last lesson, we showed you how to start creating an HTML page. Now, one of the things that we do need to include within web pages, and even though we do see that it gets rendered out, we should include this declaring the doc type, so the browser again can understand what type of document we're expecting to render out here, and we declare it as doc type HTML. So just in this type of format where we do the less than sign, the greater than sign, and we do the exclamation mark, doc type HTML, and this will help the browser understand that this is the type of document that it can be expecting. Even though we've named it HTML and it's assumed that this is an HTML file, that the browser will still try to make do with what we're providing. We should always declare that document type. And in the past, in HTML4, you might see much longer declaration of the document type, but with HTML5, they've made it really easy. And in addition to this, we usually do declare our language as well. So this is really easily done, that we add this little lang equals and then the language that we're going to be outputting the content in. And again, this is just something as well to help out the browser and better understand what type of content we're rendering out. So in addition to our doc type, our language, we can also declare a character set. And we do this within the meta tags and metadata of our web page, and this is all information that's contained within the head section. Because remember, the head section is where we're placing content that's not really meant to be consumed by the user, but more utilized by the browser and different applications that may be connecting to this web file in order to understand what it is and rendering it out. So we guide that process along by declaring a character set, and standard is UTF-8. And you'll find, depending on what type of characters that you're using within your documents, so if you've got an English, you're more than likely going to be UTF-8-8, but there are different types of character sets that allow you to produce different characters within the body of your content. So the next thing that we wanted to look at in addition to this is going to be a title tag. And we're just going to quickly look at this, our slide here of our HTML metadata. So we've got a title, we've got a head, We've got style, linking to style sheets, and also it's important to note that upper and lowercase, so it doesn't really matter which case you're using, although lowercase is technically easier to read. So when we're creating these tags, notice that I'm using a lowercase, but I could just as easily do uppercase and it actually wouldn't matter. It would still render out that same way. So it doesn't matter which case you're using, but for readability and for consistency, most of the time we do use lowercase. So title is also contained within the head section, and this is probably one of the only things that the user may be able to see and interact with. So I'm going to put a title, and this is actually what's going to show up whenever we open up our web page, and we'll see that we've got our tabs here at the top, and this is where our title is actually showing up. So when we do set a title, it's actually going to place that within the tab. So this is, again, this is viewable from the user. So in addition to metadata, we can also include styling information as well as linking out to additional files. So one of the ways that we include styling is we open up style, we close style, and then we put all of our styling information in between these tags. In addition to being able to add styling to our page directly, we can also link to a style sheet. And this is commonly done if you've got a website where you're sharing your styling information. And we're going to look at this in more detail as we work through this course. But for now, it's just important to understand that there are different ways to link to style. This is all contained within the metadata. So we specify that we're linking REL to a style sheet, and the type of content that we're looking at that's going to be contained within this link is going to be text or CSS. And then, of course, we do need to provide the path to that file. So I've simply created another style.css, and I'm going to simply link over to that style sheet, close off the tag, and now we're actually linking this page over to this style sheet. So if I was to enter in some styling in here, and of course we're going to talk more about styling in the upcoming lessons, but for now we're just going to show you that when we do refresh it, this external file CSS is able to provide styling for our HTML document. And this is one of the reasons why we link to style sheets, because this gives us the ability to create multiple pages. So I could create index HTML 1, I could create index 2 HTML, index 3 HTML, and so on, link them all to the same style sheet and have that same style effect. So that's the main benefit for linking out to external files. So in the next lesson, we're going to dive deeper into creating content. So this output content that's visible to the users, and we're going to be looking at that in more detail in the upcoming lesson. In this lesson, we're going to look at creating some content within our HTML page. Now, previous lesson, we looked at some really simple way of setting up a bunch of different tags and then placing some content within there, and it output okay within the browser. But the formatting is not proper, because when you are presenting content within your HTML page, you should have tagging around it. And one of the most common used is paragraphs. So we're going to look at how to add paragraph and paragraph element into your web page. Now, when I'm talking about tags, when I'm talking about elements, the differences are that tags are essentially this P with the bracket around it, but when we actually have a P and a closing P and some content in there, then this actually becomes an element. So those tags actually become elements when we've got content within them. We also have such a thing in HTML called closing tags and closing or self-closing tags. And those are tags that actually don't have a closing tag. So we have these title opening, title closing, head opening, head opening, but this meta one, we've just got some attribute information in here, and you don't see meta closing tag. So these are those self-closing tags, and those are essentially the two different types of tags that you're going to encounter using HTML. There's also a really good list of all the different elements that are available within HTML, and that's over here at Mozilla. So they have a listing of all the different types of elements. And if you're looking at this and you're saying, wow, that's a really big list, well, don't worry, because a lot of them you're not going to really use very often. There's only a handful of them that you're going to be using on a regular basis. And most websites are only using a handful, again, of these HTML elements. So you don't necessarily need to know that all of them and how to use them, but you should be aware that there's a lot of different types of elements depending on the scenario and the way that you're trying to present your content. So it is definitely worthwhile checking this out and taking a look at all these different elements that are available for use within HTML. Let's get back to creating some content. And one of the most basic elements is going to be a paragraph tag. So over here, I've just opened up CodePen.io, and this is a website that gives me the ability to type HTML code and have it rendered out here within the right-hand side. So kind of similar to what we were looking at earlier, where I had Notepad open and I was rendering out content on the right-hand side, but it's going to be a lot more effective and efficient because it's going to do it in real time. And the other thing too to note about CodePen is that you don't need all of this meta information. So essentially this HTML here is just that body HTML, and it's automatically linking over to the style sheet. And in addition to just plain HTML, you also have the ability to do some additional settings to this pen. And especially when it comes to CSS, you can bring in external libraries such as Bootstrap, Foundation, and so on. So it's a really flexible way to practice and build out code using CodePen. So let's begin, and we'll create our first element. And that's going to be a paragraph. So we've got our opening paragraph, and hello world, and closing paragraph. And we see over here on the right hand side, it just simply outputs that paragraph. And notice whenever we copy and paste it, so if we were to paste 4 different instances of it, we see that we've got hello world posted out 4 times. And one of the interesting things to note here is that with paragraphs, we've already got some default styling that's being added to it, that these hello worlds, they do have some spacing below it and above it. And we're going to look at this in more detail when it comes to CSS, but it is important to note that there is this default spacing and default styling that comes with some of the elements in HTML. So another thing to note with HTML is that even though I've written out hello world and I've got it a bunch of times here, so I'm adding a bunch of spacing here, just randomly trying to add in some spacing. And we notice that nothing is really changing on the right-hand side. And that's because when it comes to HTML, when you're looking at the source code, the spacing doesn't matter. No matter what, no matter how many spaces you add in there, it's only going to simply add 1 space. And we can see that here, that it only took 1 space out of all this spacing. So even if you've got some really ugly type formatting, and I'm just trying to make it as ugly as possible, of course, so even if you're writing out your HTML code and you're doing it really without any kind of convention to how you're presenting it within the HTML code, it will still render out the same way. But of course, you don't want to do this, and you want to try to avoid creating all this white space. So use the white space accordingly and wisely, and use it in a format that's going to make your HTML code, source code, more readable. And with CodePen, we've got this little handy button over here that does tidy, and essentially that's what it did, is it tidied up all of this source code to present it and make it more readable. So it basically got rid of all that excess white space and rendered us down to only have one white space. So in the next lesson, we're going to look at adding meaning to the text tags. So right now we've just presented out just straight text, and with HTML you do have the ability to add some additional meaning to these text tags. So I'm going to show you that in the upcoming lesson. When we're working with HTML,